Ashe, and welcome to another special episode of our Mandatory Mental Liberation Message series, written and produced by our esteemed elder Baba Jelani Bomani Dembe, the brilliant founder of Majestic Mind Matters University. I'm your royal narrator, Queen Magical Melanin, for this new episode. The necessity of the Mandatory Mental Liberation series at Majestic Mind Matters University lies in our focus on serving our melanin-rich culture nation. By addressing the importance of knowledge of self to produce greater self-awareness and advocating for our mental liberation, especially for our precious melanin-rich culture children, our messages aim to combat the enduring effects of generational mental enslavement stemming from the historical trauma of the chattel enslavement of the ancestors. Our initiative seeks to empower us to break free from these harmful and unfavorable legacies and cultivate a deep-rooted sense of self-identity and unwavering resilience. In a world where words carry weight, these terms hold a history of oppression and discrimination. Our melanin-rich culture nation has not given up on the fight for liberation. We know that terms like Black or brown people, people of color, perpetuate stereotypes and homogenize our melanin-rich culture people. In this message, it will only be used to maintain clarity for those who are not yet up to our melanin-rich culture standards. By embracing indigenous terms like Alkebulan, this name means Mother of Mankind, in various African languages such as Akuyu, Swahili, and Kemet, referring to ancient Egypt, and rejecting the terms Africa or African, these oppressive terms, which are unknown to many, we are reclaiming our melanin-rich culture narratives and asserting our royal cultural pride. Our melanin-rich culture nation uses terms like chattel enslavement instead of slavery, and the enslavers or slavers rather than masters or slave owners, to highlight the brutal and dehumanizing nature of historical and systemic oppression. The term chattel enslavement emphasizes the objectification of the ancestors as property, rather than acknowledging them as humans. Referring to the oppressors as the enslavers or slavers instead of masters or slave owners shifts the focus to the injustice and violence perpetrated by those in power. These terms accurately reflect the systemic exploitation and inhumanity faced by our melanin-rich culture communities throughout history, challenging traditional narratives that downplay the severity of these atrocities. Knowing the power of language in shaping global societal perceptions and challenging systemic racism is our first step to true liberation. In this message, the term African American or Black may be used in order to convey understanding regarding the mindset of that time period. Many of our messages will shed light on our melanin-rich culture civilization individuals who have helped gain more ground towards our global unity. Each moment you spend with us is a gift, a chance to grow, to learn, to be inspired. So stay with us till the end, where the real magic happens. Now, let's get started with this very special melanin-rich culture message titled The George Floyd Bill, Our Melanin-Rich Culture Path to Justice. As members of our melanin-rich culture civilization, we understand the importance of reclaiming knowledge of self and our motherland, Alkebulan. Alkebulan, also known as Africa, is the birthplace of civilization and holds a wealth of history and culture that is essential to our identity and pride. Through our joint efforts, we are working towards unifying globally and embracing our original spirituality, while honoring our ancestors and remembering the atrocities they faced through chattel enslavement. The George Floyd Bill is a crucial step towards ensuring justice and accountability in the face of police violence. It is named after George Floyd, a Black man who was brutally murdered by a police officer in Minneapolis in 2020. His death sparked widespread protests and calls for change in the criminal justice system. The bill aims to address police brutality and systemic racism within law enforcement by implementing reforms to hold officers accountable for their actions. The presence of Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological phenomenon in which a person develops a bond with their captor, can affect us in our daily lives as we navigate a society that perpetuates anti-Black violence. We must acknowledge the trauma and pain that has been inflicted upon our communities for generations and work to dismantle the systems of oppression that continue to target us. The George Floyd bill includes provisions that would require police officers to wear body cameras, ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants, and create a national registry of police misconduct. These measures are crucial in holding law enforcement accountable for their actions and preventing further acts of violence against Black communities. By supporting this bill, we are taking a stand against the injustices that have plagued our communities for far too long. As members of our melanin-rich culture civilization, we have a responsibility to honor the memory of our ancestors and fight for justice on their behalf. The legacy of chattel enslavement continues to impact us today as we face systemic racism and discrimination in all aspects of society. By advocating for the George Floyd bill, we are working towards a more just and equitable future for ourselves and future generations. In order to reclaim knowledge of self and our motherland, we must confront the painful realities of our history and actively work towards healing and justice. The George Floyd bill represents an important step towards addressing the issues of police violence and systemic racism that have plagued our communities for far too long. By coming together in our joint efforts, we can amplify our voices and demand the change that we deserve. The George Floyd bill should become a law in order to address the systemic issues of police violence and racism that continue to impact our communities. As members of our melanin-rich culture civilization, we have a duty to honor the memory of our ancestors and fight for justice on their behalf. By supporting this bill, we are taking a stand against injustice and working towards a more just and equitable future for all. Let us continue to unite globally, reclaim our identity, and demand the change that we deserve. As individuals from a melanin-rich culture and civilization, we must recognize the importance of unity and self-empowerment in our journey towards reclaiming knowledge of self and our motherland, Alkebulan. Alkebulan, also known as Africa, is the birthplace of civilization and holds a wealth of history and wisdom that has been stripped away from us through centuries of oppression and colonization. It is our duty to reconnect with our roots, embrace our original spirituality, and honor our ancestors who paved the way for us. The devastating effects of chattel enslavement on our people cannot be ignored. Our ancestors endured unspeakable horrors at the hands of slave masters who sought to dehumanize them and strip away their culture and identity. The trauma from this dark period in our history still lingers within our collective consciousness, manifesting in various ways, including the presence of Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological response where victims of abuse develop an emotional bond with their captors as a means of survival. In the context of our history, this syndrome can be seen in the ways we internalize and perpetuate the oppressive systems that were imposed upon us. Whether it is through colorism, internalized racism, or any other form of self-hate, we must confront and dismantle these destructive patterns that have been ingrained in us over generations. In order to truly unify globally and reclaim knowledge of self and our motherland, we must first acknowledge the impact of chattel enslavement and Stockholm Syndrome on our communities. We must confront the discomfort and pain that comes with recognizing our own internalized oppression and work towards healing and liberation. This process of self-reflection and healing is essential for reclaiming our power and restoring our connection to our culture and heritage. One way to combat the effects of Stockholm Syndrome is through education and empowerment. By arming ourselves with knowledge of our history and culture, we can begin to dismantle the lies and distortions that have been ingrained in us. We must seek out the wisdom of our ancestors, study our traditions and practices, and reclaim our spirituality as a source of strength and resilience. In addition to education, community building and solidarity are crucial in our efforts towards unification and self-empowerment. By coming together as a collective, we can support each other in our healing journeys, amplify our voices, and work towards dismantling systems of oppression that continue to marginalize us. Through collective action and advocacy, we can bring about meaningful change and uplift our communities. Honoring our ancestors is also a key aspect of reclaiming our identity and cultivating a sense of pride in our heritage. By acknowledging the sacrifices and struggles of those who came before us, we can draw strength and inspiration from their resilience. Through rituals, ceremonies, and storytelling, we can ensure that their legacy lives on and that their contributions to our culture are not forgotten. As individuals from a melanin-rich culture and civilization, it is our collective responsibility to unify globally, reclaim knowledge of self and our motherland, and honor our ancestors. By confronting the effects of chattel enslavement and Stockholm Syndrome, and working towards healing and empowerment, we can pave the way for a brighter future for ourselves and generations to come. Together, we can create a world where our culture and heritage are celebrated and respected, and where our voices are heard and valued. As members of a melanin-rich culture civilization, we are united in our efforts to reclaim our knowledge of self and our motherland, Alkebulan. This quest for self-discovery and cultural reclamation is essential to our collective identity and unity on a global scale. Embracing our original spirituality and honoring our ancestors is at the core of our mission as we strive to heal from the devastating effects of chattel enslavement and systemic racism that have plagued our communities for generations. It is through this process of healing and remembrance that we can confront the lingering effects of Stockholm Syndrome and work towards a brighter future for ourselves and future generations. The George Floyd bill represents a significant step forward in supporting our mission to embrace our original spirituality and reclaim our cultural identity as a melanin-rich civilization. This legislation, which seeks to address police brutality and systemic racism in the United States, is a crucial step towards achieving justice and equality for all melanin-rich individuals. By holding law enforcement officers accountable for their actions and implementing reforms to prevent future acts of violence against our communities, the George Floyd bill aligns with our commitment to honoring our ancestors and fighting for a better future for ourselves and our descendants. One of the key provisions of the George Floyd bill is the establishment of a national registry of police misconduct, which will provide transparency and accountability in cases of police violence. This registry will help to prevent officers with a history of misconduct from moving from one department to another without facing consequences for their actions. By holding law enforcement accountable for their actions and ensuring that they are not able to act with impunity, this provision of the bill supports our mission to reclaim our cultural identity and fight for justice for our communities. Additionally, the George Floyd bill includes measures to ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants, two tactics that have been disproportionately used against melanin-rich individuals. By addressing these harmful practices and implementing reforms to prevent their use in the future, the bill takes a step towards addressing the systemic racism and violence that have plagued our communities for far too long. This commitment to reform and accountability is essential to our mission of embracing our original spirituality and reclaiming our cultural identity as a melanin-rich civilization. In order to fully embrace our original spirituality and reclaim our cultural identity, we must confront the legacy of chattel enslavement and the trauma it has inflicted on our communities. The presence of Stockholm Syndrome, which manifests as a psychological response to captivity and oppression, is a direct result of the horrors endured by our ancestors during the transatlantic slave trade. By acknowledging the impact of this trauma and working towards healing and reconciliation, we can begin to break free from the psychological chains that have bound us for generations. The George Floyd bill represents a critical step towards achieving justice and equality for melanin-rich individuals in the United States. By holding law enforcement accountable for their actions and implementing reforms to prevent future acts of violence against our communities, the bill aligns with our mission to embrace our original spirituality and reclaim our cultural identity. As we continue on our journey of self-discovery and cultural reclamation, we must remember the sacrifices of our ancestors and honor their memory by working towards a brighter future for ourselves and future generations. As members of a melanin-rich culture and civilization, it is imperative that we come together in our joint efforts to unify globally, reclaim knowledge of self, and reconnect with our motherland, Alkebulan, the birthplace of civilization. In our journey to healing and empowerment, it is crucial that we embrace our original spirituality and honor our ancestors who have paved the way for us. One of the most devastating events in our history is the chattel enslavement of our people. The horrors and atrocities committed during this dark period have had lasting effects on our community. From the physical and psychological trauma inflicted upon our ancestors to the generations of systemic racism and oppression that we continue to face today, the legacy of slavery looms large in our collective consciousness. One aspect of this legacy that continues to impact us is the presence of Stockholm Syndrome. This psychological phenomenon occurs when individuals who are mistreated or oppressed develop feelings of attachment and loyalty towards their oppressors. In the context of our community, Stockholm Syndrome can manifest in various ways, from internalized racism to self-hatred to a reluctance to challenge systems of injustice. Despite the challenges we face, we must come together as a community to address the systemic issues that continue to impact us today. One way we can do this is by supporting the George Floyd bill, a piece of legislation that seeks to address police brutality and systemic racism in the United States. This bill is named after George Floyd, a black man who was murdered by a police officer in Minneapolis, sparking widespread protests and calls for justice. The George Floyd bill includes measures such as banning chokeholds, establishing a national registry of police misconduct, and ending qualified immunity for law enforcement officers. These provisions are crucial steps towards holding police accountable for their actions and ensuring that our communities are treated with dignity and respect. In order to ensure that the George Floyd bill becomes law, we must engage in advocacy and activism at all levels of government. This includes contacting our elected officials, participating in protests and marches, and educating our communities about the importance of this legislation. By raising our voices and demanding change, we can make a real impact on the systemic issues that continue to plague our community. But the fight for justice does not end with the passage of a single piece of legislation. We must continue to work towards dismantling systems of oppression and advocating for the rights and freedoms of all marginalized communities. By centering the experiences and voices of those most impacted by systemic racism, we can create a more just and equitable society for us as well. In our journey towards healing and empowerment, it is crucial that we remember the sacrifices and struggles of our ancestors. Their resilience and resistance have paved the way for us, and it is our duty to honor their memory by continuing the fight for justice and equality. By coming together as a community, embracing our heritage and spirituality, and advocating for change, we can ensure that the George Floyd bill becomes law and make a positive impact on the world around us. Together, we can create a future that is rooted in justice, equality, and solidarity. In our joint efforts to reclaim our history, honor our ancestors, and combat systemic oppression, we can build a world where all people are treated with dignity and respect. I'm your royal narrator, Queen Magical Melanin. We trust that this very special message has expanded your understanding through the insights shared by our highly esteemed producer, Elder Baba Jelani Bomani Dembe, founder of Majestic Mind Matters University, in our Mandatory Mental Liberation Series special message. Remember this, it is essential to honor the ancestors. We have a unique connection to the ancestors. They endured many unwarranted struggles, preserved our melanin-rich culture, and passed down invaluable wisdom through many generations. By honoring the ancestors, we pay honorable tribute to our roots and draw great strength and much-needed inspiration from the unwavering resilience and royal legacy that has paved the way for our present and future generations. Ancestral reverence is a powerful way for us to continually uphold our own melanin-rich identity, heritage, and cultural legacy. Here is an ancient Alkebulan proverb to keep in mind. If you think you are too small to make a difference, you have not spent the night with a mosquito. Remember this as well, whenever you are in the presence of anyone, saying, "They don't see color," it actually means, "They don't see you." We acknowledge and honor the indigenous name of our glorious continent as Alkebulan. This name means Mother of Mankind in various African languages such as Akuyu, Swahili, and Kemet, referring to ancient Egypt, and rejecting the terms Africa or African. As royal members of our melanin-rich culture nation, we must strive for knowledge of self for greater personal awareness. Always treat yourself kindly and seek to live a totally awesome and gloriously fulfilling melanin-rich culture life. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. So, like, subscribe to stay updated, and share this very special melanin-rich culture link with everyone that you care about and that really cares about you and all of yours as well. And thank you for listening to this enchanting special message titled The George Floyd bill, our melanin-rich culture path to justice. Stay woke. Ashe.